Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and do you remember 1996? Don't worry if you don't, because my past self is there as we speak. Now, Elliot, what's the difference between 1996 and now? People had 3 hands.
The Nintendo 64 versus the PS1. Who's gonna win? The grey box or the slightly darker grey box? Video game consoles. There's been a lot of them, but how many have actually been a success? How many have beat out all the other consoles in their generation?
5?
Now, this is when 1996 comes in. See, I told you there was a reason for it. This was the year the Nintendo 64 released. This console was Nintendo's first 3D and 64-bit console, and was placed to compete directly with Sony's PlayStation. Now, the PlayStation has a rich lore behind it. Sony was originally supposed to work with Nintendo to create a CD add-on for their 16-bit console, the Super Nintendo. However, Nintendo cancelled the deal at the last minute to work with Philips, who had been much cheaper. Sony felt betrayed and in revenge decided to create the console they would have done with Nintendo, using the knowledge they'd gained, and created a huge success out of revenge. The PS1 was revolutionary for games consoles, as it was the first popular one to be a disc-only console, and was 32-bit. This made it more powerful than both the SNES and Sega Genesis, the consoles of the time. This console also birthed many great franchises such as Crash Bandicoot and Tomb Raider. Overall, the console was a big hit. Nintendo knew that they needed to make a new console to compete and that 3D was the future, so they started to work on the Nintendo Ultra 64. Nintendo soon realised that that name was far too cool for them and changed the console to the Nintendo 64. The console was 64-bit, double the bits of the PS1, and had the advantage of having popular characters such as Mario, Zelda and Pokemon. However, Nintendo was so close to greatness, but suddenly when...
Yeah, give us some more of these square things.
Yeah, the Nintendo 64 stuck with cartridges which were not as powerful as the PS1's discs. Overall, I love these consoles. I happen to own both and have them placed right next to each other. Have you ever seen a more brotherly rivalry? However, it's clear that the PS1 won this war. It had a much larger popular appeal, and the discs meant that they could store so much more data, even though it was only 32-bit. The PS1 also released earlier, so it had a larger customer base when the Nintendo 64 released. Now, the PS1 controllers are great. The first model is basically an SNES controller, but the later DualShock models are amazing and feel great. I always like the PlayStation controllers and believe this is just as good as the later ones. The Nintendo 64 controller, on the other hand, looks like something the aliens brought with them along with the Zoom. Being serious though, I do like this controller. Its design makes it unique and its many play styles allow for variety for different game controls. However, one thing the Nintendo 64 has over the PS1 is games. Sure, the PS1 has Crash Bandicoot and many other classic games like Attitude Wrestling, but you can't beat the guy in the overalls. The Nintendo 64 had some great games such as Super Mario 64, Goldeneye and Banjo-Kazooie. Nintendo revolutionized the idea of 3D gameplay, while a lot of PS1 games were like,
"Hey, this isn't even my jurisdiction. Get him!"
The Nintendo 64 also had 4 controller ports which allowed a lot more multiplayer games, while the PS1 required an adapter which caused less developers to implement the feature. Overall, both consoles have their merits, and while I'd say I like the Nintendo 64 a little bit better for its unique games, the PlayStation 1 definitely won this generation. It outsold the Nintendo 64 by a lot and appealed to a much wider market. It's funny that in another timeline Nintendo and Sony could still be partners to this day, but in this universe they are rivals. However, the Nintendo 64 shouldn't be too sad about losing to the PS1. I mean, at least it beat the Sega Saturn.
Well, that was an interesting topic. Now, don't think just because I picked the Nintendo 64 that I don't like the PS1. I mean, Nintendo 64 had some great games and all, but without the PS1, how would I play Jimmy White?